Welcome, everyone. I'm Doug Ward, the Associate Director at the Center for Teaching Excellence at the University of Kansas, and I'm also an Associate Professor in Journalism and Mass Communications.
And I'm George Rehrey with the Center for Learning Analytics and Student Success at Indiana University. And we want to welcome you today to our conversation about our presentation with the title of Trust Faculty with Learning Analytics to Improve Student Success. We really look forward to you being with us today in our virtual recording.
Our presentation is called Let's Trust Faculty with Learning Analytics to Improve Student Success. And we will talk about some of the work that we've done on our campuses and then give you some takeaways to try to help you think about how this might work at your own campus.
Right, Doug, and this is going to be sort of a dialogue between Doug and I, and we'll show some slides and talk back and forth. We're going to focus on three key areas of our work. One is cultural change, one is working with internal networks, and then working with external networks. But before we get really rolling, we wanted to make sure to acknowledge all the other people and organizations that have generously supported our work thus far. And this includes folks from the University of California, Davis, some colleagues of mine at Indiana University, University of Saskatchewan, and University of Kansas, as well as University of British Columbia.
And that's very important because we're going to be talking about the networks that we've created and some of the organizations that we've worked with, including the Bayview Alliance, the Association of American Universities, and then Howard Hughes Medical Institute worked a lot with Marco. And it's really through all of that collaboration that we've been able to do a lot of what we've done. So you want to talk a bit first about when we say learning analytics, what do we mean? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways folks have in the past defined learning analytics. We in our work have found that it's difficult in the kind of things that we're doing to make a distinction between what traditionally has been called academic analytics and student learning analytics. And so we have adopted the definition or a framework that Sclater has written about. And basically his categories of analytical data are based on where the data originates from. And so in his case, we have reported data, observed data, derived data, or inferred data. But in any case, what we're doing is we're providing data dashboards to our faculty of all ranks, faculty of all disciplines. The four big chunks of data that are being used in these dashboards are what we at IU are calling MARC dashboards, and they refer to majors, which is basically tracking the student's pathway towards graduation, and then student attributes, which we mostly consider to be demographics, such as race and ethnicity. And then we track the retention as students persist, and also all the courses students are taking. And this is all coming from a student information systems warehouse. So anyway, that's predominantly the data that we're providing to our learning analytics fellows, which are faculty.
And ours are similar to this. We have data dashboards that we have online, and we've worked with our university data folks on this, on making available a lot of the things that we have in aggregate. And then we'll talk a bit more here in a minute about how we've applied those. Our presentation is called We Should Trust Faculty with Learning Analytics. Why is that even an issue, George? I mean, when we're talking about trusting faculty, that seems like a no-brainer.
Well, Doug, as you know, and many people know, traditionally, before really about 5 years ago, most of the analytical data we're working with, which is coming out of the SII systems, was only available to administrators, some academic advisors, and other people who had special requests to their institutional research offices. But in the last few years, all of that has changed. You want to put that first point up there for me, Doug? And so the first thing that we recognize in our model of change and we're trying to do is that faculty are instrumental when adopting innovative practices in higher education. The practices that really stick are the ones that faculty have adopted. Secondly, faculty assume those ownership of new practices when those practices are valuable to them and their students and their courses and programs.
I want to stop there for just a minute because I think
Yeah.
when we're talking about the faculty and using this data, previously it had been primarily sort of top down, or it's been available to administrators, it's been available to advisors, but really not to faculty. And the faculty is really where we have done a lot of our work, which is looking at it in a different way, because if you try to impose something from top down, you'll get some kind of results, but unless you get the buy-in from the faculty, it's going to be hard to make a lot of systemic changes. And so that's really been our approach that we've worked with at the Bayview Alliance in trying to make this more of a department out, or a working with the faculty and from the sort of from the bottom up, because you've got to have all of these different areas to make it work.
Yeah, and so furthering that thought, learning analytics provides new insights to the faculty, which are basically on the ground with the students. What we have discovered is that those new insights shift how faculty think about their teaching within the broader context of student success.
And that's at the end what we're really after in all of this, is to help find ways of innovating, of finding areas where there might be some bottlenecks, of finding areas where there are problems in the system, and making them aware in ways that we've not been able to do previously. So this is all part of our effort toward cultural change. And so when we're talking about culture change, and when we're talking about this from the faculty point of view, from a department point of view, but also from a university point of view, in how we can get these changes to persist, because unless we are able to do some of these changes within the culture of a department or a university, we might be able to have them now, but then they'll go away. That's a key to this model.
Right, and so we are hoping to establish a data-informed culture. In order to do that, we have to change the attitudes and the beliefs and the behaviors of faculty. And what we have discovered is that, unlike other types of change that we've asked faculty to do, the most interesting part about this work is that since they are looking at the work of their students and what their students are doing, we don't find the same resistance. Quite to the contrary, we find a lot of excitement and engagement. What we're looking for long-term is for a shared responsibility of student success, evidence-based teaching, and reporting that continually on improved student success, as opposed to just grades in a course.
We found many of the same things at KU. I think that you have at IU, and that when you bring faculty in and start showing them data, they get very excited about it. And they're suddenly able to look at a curriculum. They're able to look at their classes and their curriculum and their students in a different way than they ever have before. And that's been fun to work with faculty with these sorts of things, and to help them see some of the areas that they probably haven't seen before, or really haven't even thought about before. And in doing that, they start sharing that with colleagues. And as they share that with colleagues, others start to see the benefit of it. And then that really reinforces this idea of culture change too.
So when we're talking about this cultural change, we're also talking about how networks that are made up of universities and what we refer to as network improvement communities can help foster that kind of change. And we're involved in a network improvement community called the Bayview Alliance. And within the Bayview Alliance, we've created a group of universities that we are calling the Learning Analytics Research Collaborative, or LARC. So Doug, why don't you walk us through how LARC is designed and the players involved and the kind of ideas we have for that?
There are several things to keep in mind with this model in how we have brought faculty together with learning analytics. And this idea of community is really important because it takes several types of people to make this work. And it starts with the data experts who work with the faculty members. But in between them is a facilitator, someone who understands the data and can work back and forth between the data experts. And you need the support of your administrators. Even as we're working within our universities, we're working with partners outside the university in a learning analytics community. In this case, Indiana University is leading, but several other universities within the Bayview Alliance have been working with Indiana. That's important because it helps us share ideas back and forth. It gives us leverage and support outside our universities and ideas that we can bring back to our colleagues at individual universities and to administrators and data specialists to say, here's what's happening at other universities, and we'd like to do something similar. That's been really important in moving all of our data work forward. We've approached learning analytics a little bit differently on each of our campuses. And at KU, we have primarily done this at a department level and involved several different people in a department at the same time. And this started with a program called the STEM Analytics Working Group. This was a group that we put together with a grant from the Association of American Universities. We got a mini grant for this, looking at how using data analytics might be able to improve the curriculum. And as a result, work toward better learning, retention, progression, and equity in classes. So these are the groups that we had at KU working together and worked with our analytics folks in saying, here's what we'd like to know. And then the analytics specialists could say, here are the data that we have that might match up with that. This is also coming from an organization called Trestle, which is another group of research universities tied to the Bayview Alliance that was about using embedded experts in courses to try to improve, again, learning, retention, progression, and equity. All of these different groups took cues from each other and started seeing, oh, that's what you can do with some of the learning analytics. And we've really taken an iterative approach, which I'll talk about more about later. But this really helped us get faculty involved and really created a lot of excitement in these departments about what you could do with learning analytics. We have another program right now called the Curriculum Innovation Program that's following that similar model. We're bringing in the departments and having them ask questions about what they could do with their curriculum. The third part of what we're doing is that we have recently created a My Students dashboard, working with our university data specialists on this. The idea here is to help faculty get a better understanding of who is in their classes. The real focus for us with this dashboard is more of the larger courses. With any kind of data, you have to be careful not to identify the individuals. And so we've made sure that with this dashboard, none of the individuals is identifiable. Only courses that have 10 students or more in them have access to this. The instructors do. The idea is to give them information about their courses and then also to link it to resources if they need to work with freshmen. If they have a lot of freshmen in their courses, they have a lot of first generation students. We then provide resources to them. I want to give a shout out to Marco Molinaro from the University of California, Davis, who has a similar dashboard that we borrowed ideas from, and also from Jim Greer at University of Saskatchewan, who's the late Jim Greer, who really kind of opened my eyes to what you can do with some of the data that you can make available to your faculty to help them understand more about their courses. So this is the first page of our dashboard. It also has a couple of other pages that shows the types of classes that students are taking this semester and the types of classes that students have taken in previous semesters. Now, George, you've had a different approach at IU with data. You want to explain that?
Different, but the same in many ways. But our Learning Analytics Fellows program is now it's in its 5th year. Really was what got the Learning Analytics Research Collaborative off the ground. What we do is we work with individual faculty. They can come from any discipline. And as you can see in the right-hand corner up there, it's pretty evenly distributed among the different, what I would call mega disciplines. But in fact, this has just happened by sheer randomness in the sense that we just ask faculty to submit a proposal with questions they have about their students. We give them some funding. Then we provide them with the data, and then they write up a research report and share that with us about what they've learned about their students. And then finally, we have a poster session at the end of each year where anyone on campus can come and find out about the work. And our Center for Learning Analytics and Student Success, with the acronym of CLASS, actually, so far we've had 66 research projects, 56 individual faculty members from 25 different programs. We have several goals. One goal is to have at least one faculty member from every department and/or school on our campus be a fellow. And then our other goal is to have multiple fellows within departments to really sustain that cultural change. And a good example of that would be our economics department, which we've had 5 fellows go through that program now. And so the hope is, as an example, when the economics faculty are sitting around talking about their students, rather than using anecdotal stories that we've all been telling each other about our students for years, the idea is that they'll look at the data. And when they're making decisions about their curriculum or their courses, we're anticipating that one of our fellows in the room will be able to raise their hand and say, oh, I have some data on that. And that's really ultimately the vision of our program.
I want to follow up on your poster session because we've had a lot of success with a poster session. And I think that's an important part of this process is sharing, that this is not something that you keep internally. It's something that when we bring people into the programs that we have and give them funding through our Center for Teaching Excellence, one of the requirements is that they create a poster at the end of the year. And we have a big event then where everyone who's been involved in our programs presents those posters, and we have some wonderful conversation. That gives an opportunity for people around the university to see what else is happening in other departments and to get ideas about what they might do.
But one thing is that all of the campuses that are part of the Learning Analytics Research Collaborative share in common is this theoretical model that we all embraced from Marco Molinaro at the University of California, Davis. It's a theoretical model of change that recognizes the difficulty of creating sustained change with faculty in the universities. So Doug, maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I want to point out several key elements of this model. Moving from awareness to action is a common approach to problem solving. We raise awareness of a problem and then we take action on it. Too often, though, we lack the understanding we need to make informed decisions. In this model, data provides awareness of a problem in a class or a curriculum. Before we take action, though, we need to understand what's really happening. We can gain that understanding from working with educational experts, from reading literature, or researching the cause. Once we do that, we can act in a more meaningful way. Then we can reflect on what we've done and how our interventions have worked. That often raises awareness of additional problems that allow us to start the process over again. Making this process work requires several types of people. Individual faculty members or departments work with a larger community of colleagues within a university, others who are using analytics in this case. They in turn work with the learning analytics research community we talked about before. All of that provides a much deeper look into some of the problems we face in our classes and curriculum. It also provides a much broader opportunities for solving problems by drawing communities together and making teaching more of a community process rather than an individual activity. The cycle of progress is one way that we think about this. There are also some principles related to complexity that are important to what we do. George, can you talk about that some more?
Sure. So one of the theoretical underpinnings comes from the work of George Seaman and his colleagues about complexity principles relevant to higher ed. We have found this to be very useful in thinking about how to advance the work, and you can also find out more about that in our book chapter that we'll mention at the end of this presentation. So Doug, but you know, all of this we've talked about is very interesting, but really what's most compelling about doing this work with faculty is the stories that come out of the work and the stories that we can tell each other about what we learn about student success, both within courses and programs and throughout the institution. So maybe you could share a story or two about some of the things faculty have uncovered and talked about in your program.
Absolutely. And really, it's those stories that help us communicate to administrators, that help us communicate to other faculty members, and even students, and to the general public about the kinds of things that are important in education and where we are trying to make a difference and where we're trying to make some changes. And what we've found is that the iterations that we have had in our data projects have just been crucial, because faculty start this process, they're learning something new. So the questions that they start with are often not very substantial. It might just be, who are our students? We don't feel like we know enough about who our students are. And as a result, they hear what others have done or what other kinds of questions people have. And then they often will say, we want what they have. That then generates more ideas, more enthusiasm, and they keep going a little bit deeper into the data, a little bit more sophisticated with their questions. And it really feeds on itself and creates a wonderful opportunity for everyone to learn about where particular classes, particular disciplines fit into a larger curriculum around the university. A couple of places that have particularly interesting stories. One is geology. Jennifer Roberts, who's sitting there at the table, is a professor of geology and was the department chair. She started with their introductory geology course and was recognizing that students simply were not paying attention, were not gaining what they needed to out of that course, and really started changing the way things were done. Made that course very active so that students were learning from each other, they were asking a lot of questions, and really made a difference in that curriculum. They then started looking deeper into that data. What they found is that through this more active curriculum, women especially, who had high rates of failure in that class, were now on par with men. From that, they started wondering, well, what's happening elsewhere in our curriculum? And as we started working with them with the data on this, they were seeing problems with calculus. And calculus was often a class that was slowing their students or was pushing them out of the program. And so they started thinking, okay, well, what is it that we need out of calculus? And could we do that ourselves? So they've actually dropped the calculus requirement and have created a course on their own. They're just starting that now. They don't have data from that, but it was from that data that they were able to look to see where some of those bottlenecks. Another really good example is physics. One of the instructors in physics has changed some of those courses to a competency approach. One of the problems in some of these courses is that faculty were relying on high stakes tests, so that if students took the first test and did poorly, they were now in a hole and were really struggling to do better. So what he has done is created a competency-based approach and tied all of the exam questions to various competencies that students need to master during the semester. And then they have multiple opportunities through the semester to show that they have learned those things. By bringing in the data from the university, they've been able to tie this into that broader curriculum and helping students progress more fully through that curriculum. And it's really made a difference in how the students approach the class. George, do you want to share some stories too?
Yeah, Doug. So we have plenty of stories that have come out of our program at Indiana University. One of my favorite stories has to do with debunking narratives that we've been telling each other for years about students without any real evidence. And one of those narratives is about the not our best students rationale. And this especially happens in STEM programs where faculty will say, well, those students that leave STEM, they're not our best students. And so it's good for them to leave STEM. They'll find a better program, they'll be happier, and we'll all be happier. But what we found out through our learning analytics data is that, in fact, 15 to 24% of the students had a grade of a B- or higher when they dropped out of that particular STEM program, either moved to a STEM program or left STEM altogether. And of course, the point of this is there's many reasons why these students leave those STEM programs, but the reason isn't because they're probably not smart enough. The reason is because they've made decisions based on other factors. Another story that I like to talk about is the learning analytics for students majoring in healthcare management policy, or like what we like to call, it's the fault of the prerequisite class. And this all started with a faculty fellow looking at demographics in her class and finding some grading disparities that she thought probably had to do with the prerequisite math class. However, what she discovered through the data, 10 years of it with thousands of students, is that the grades that students got in her class related to the prerequisite class were not about how well that student did in that prereq class. It was about how long ago the students had taken it. This led her to move forward with a development of an evidence-based curriculum MACME committee, where they were starting to think more clearly about how and when students are taking classes within the curriculum. And I think that's a great story to have. Yeah, and speaking about that idea of an iterative process, or I like to think of as a scaffold process, this is what we've discovered so far has been happening with faculty as they use analytical data to discover more about their own students. And the first thing is that they find out what's happened, and that's very significant because oftentimes we don't know what has happened. We just think we know what's happened. And then the next step is to try to understand why those things have occurred. And then from there, move to what might occur in the future based on what we know in the past. And finally, being able to prescribe some things that would help mitigate some of the problems we found in the earlier steps. And I've seen this process happen over and over again now with our faculty, and it's a quite interesting development for them. And we like to call that from hindsight to foresight, which I borrowed from another conference presentation, and I really like this idea a lot.
So when we're looking back at the work that we've done, here are some of the things that we think are really important in approaching data work. One is that you have to approach this as an exercise in culture change. That is, that you can't just say, all right, we're going to give people data, we're going to hope that they do the right thing. You really have to scaffold it for them. You have to show them how to do this. You have to show them examples. And throughout this, we're building collaborations internally, but also externally. The internal collaborations are important because it helps faculty ask questions of each other. It helps them ask questions of those who have better knowledge of the data. And then as they start doing this, it's those iterations that really start to make a difference. But it starts with that idea of culture change and working with the departments, working with the individuals to try to change the way that they're looking at data and to make that data an important part of the process, and then creating that support network. And that has been really crucial for us at KU and at the other universities as well. And I think with creating that support network externally has allowed us to say, well, Indiana is doing something, and University of California, Davis is doing something, and Saskatchewan is doing something. Here's what we'd like to do at KU. And that really then helps provide some authority to the questions that we're asking and to the requests that we're making of the data specialists at the university. And then finally, telling the stories, being able to relay what we're learning to faculty, and then also for the faculty to be able to relay what they're doing to their colleagues and to get them excited and to help them understand why the data is important. And that really ropes right back around to culture change. That by telling the stories, you start to build this into the process, and it's in that process that culture starts to change because it then becomes part of the fabric of what we do. George, could you tell us where we can find out more? If people are interested in this, where can they go for some more information?
There are a number of different publications out there already about some of the work we've been talking about today. 3 of them actually are related to Society for Learning Analytics Research. Several of them were at recent LAK conferences. And then, of course, we have the book chapter along with another chapter in a book about the scholarship, teaching, and learning that sort of traces the beginnings of all of this work.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope you have a great experience with the rest of EDUCAUSE Online. I'm Doug Ward, again from the University of Kansas.
And I'm George Rehrey, saying we look forward to hearing from some of you, or certainly look forward to seeing you in a real person-to-person meeting in the future. Have a great day.